All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back for another awesome episode. Today, I am so happy to have a guest on today named Troy Taylor. He just so happens to be the Senior Director for Performance and Innovation for Tonal. So, when it comes to all things exercise and exercise at home in particular, this is the guy that I cannot wait to pick his brain. So, Troy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Same here, same here. But before we dive into anything, I started a bit of a new tradition on this show, and we got to start it off right. And this will pretty much tell my audience everything they need to know about Troy. And after he answers this, guys, feel free. You'll know whether this is going good or bad.
A
So,
lot of pressure.
Troy, yep. Do you believe in burpees?
Do I believe in them? Sure. I wouldn't program them a ton, but yes. Yeah, they have their
That is
place.
that is a very politically correct answer. I appreciate that.
No, there's nothing wrong with some burpees.
Yeah. I'm just waiting for the one person I ask where they're like, I effing hate them. I'm going and just go off. But everybody's been so
Yeah.
cool about it lately.
Yeah. I probably effing hate them myself, but they have their place. They have their
Yeah.
role like most things.
Okay. Fair answer. Fair answer. Now we'll dive in. Now that we've vetted you, we can proceed. So now, Troy, I think it's pretty cool that we're having this conversation right now, being that we're on like the like latter half of the Olympics, being that you've been involved in US ski and snowboarding. So when it comes to like the athlete side of thing as opposed to the general pop side of thing, when it comes to the similarities, do you notice any between like regular people and like Olympians or borderline Olympians when it comes to how people eat, how people train, and things like that? Or
Yeah,
motivation
for
to
sure.
train.
Absolutely. I've been fortunate, actually, 7 Olympic Games. I've been to with 3 different countries, and so over about 20 years. Yeah, there's a lot of the very similar things that athletes. There's some very different things that separate them too, but I think all of the like athletes at times go through their ups and downs. They have their times when it's really jamming, they're feeling good, and they're in the vibe. Got sleep is dialed, nutrition is dialed, like it feels like everything's clicking and really moving forward. And there are times, and they're more frequent than most people expect, when they're struggling, either for a motivation, or life stresses are getting in the way, whether it's family or work or money or whatever it might be. And so they have those same ups and downs. I think there's a lot of similarities, and I would say from a training perspective and like physiology perspective, like the same principles are true, right? They're principles of training. It's not principles of training for an elite athlete and principles trainings of for regular folks like myself. The same things that actually I work on and program at Tonal are a lot of the same fundamental physiological principles that we would train elite athletes. So lots and lots of similarities.
So what I'm getting from that is that athletes at the highest level aren't even perfect.
Oh, definitely not. They are very, very talented. They are very, very dedicated. They work extremely hard. But no, they're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. They go through the same challenges like everyone else. What they are exceptionally good at is not having those long droughts of bad times. Right? Don't fall off the wagon for long. They have these very like short, okay, memory of a goldfish. It was a bad performance, a bad training session. Let's review it, analyze it, and let's move forward and make it better. And they're much better, I would say, on average at getting back on the horse, but they probably fall it off as often or frequently as regular people do.
Yeah, I love that you said that because I think a lot of people, especially those that listen to the podcast, find themselves in those droughts where it's like, all right, well, I had a horrible week with work and with everything going on, and I just didn't get back to it for like the whole month.
Yeah, yeah, that happens to it. Certainly happens to me. I was traveling to New York for last week for work. Training was not the best. I think I got maybe half a training session in. Diet was definitely not the best. Ate out at restaurants far too often. Had a couple of glasses of wine with dinner, which I every night or
Oh,
three
how
nights in a
dare you?
row,
You're a
which I
fitness
don't normally.
person and you're having booze. How dare you?
Geez, I know. But yeah, it's about how we reset and try and get back on the wagon. And yeah, I think athletes suffer from that same challenge for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And it's really that rebound time that's this differentiator. So that's really, really cool to hear. Now, when it comes to like the main thing for this discussion. I definitely want to go over tonal because I think that it has so much value when it comes to the at-home crowd, because I know the at-home crowd is inundated with, okay, lightweight stuff like aerobic style exercises, and it's good to start on that, but eventually you got to level up, right?
Yeah, like I'm a 100%. Any exercise is good exercise. Something is always better than nothing. But there are times when we need to keep adding stress or challenges to the system, to the body. From a strength training perspective, the concept of mechanical tension for muscle growth. And one of the ways that we can do that, we can do it with light weights or relatively light weights. But we also do need to add resistance, probably beyond a certain sort of, say, beginner kind of pace, if we want to continue to make progress in that way. And so, yeah, there's certainly I guess a way to continue to adapt and evolve.
Yeah. And I know when it comes to the whole discussion of increasing intensity, increasing weight, trying to push your body to actually start to change, there's a little bit of resistance there because there's a little bit of like fear surrounding that. Now, especially in the older populations where we'll say 40 plus, what are some things that you notice like with that group that, sorry, didn't, not calling you old, Troy,
It's
but
fine. I'm 45, so I can take it. I fully am.
to be fair, guys, if you're watching the video, this guy does not look 45. But when it comes to the increasing the intensity as people age, what have you found is the big difference that keeps people safe and strong as opposed to the people that kind of fulfill the prophecy of getting hurt?
Yeah, I think like it's relative intensity. So like intensity doesn't mean necessarily big weight. If you are relatively beginner and relatively new, you know, your one rep max, the maximum resistance or weight that you can lift for one repetition, you know, let's say, I don't know, take a goblet squat, you know, fairly common movement, sometimes done with a dumbbell or you can do on tonal. That might be, you know, 20 pounds, 30 pounds. It might be body weight to start with, but it's relative intensity. And so your relative, as in a percentage, a high percentage of that 20 pounds might be 15 pounds. That's 75% of your one rep max. That's relatively high intensity. So I think it's important to put into context of, it doesn't mean that we're, you know, suddenly loading up a barbell with, you know, 45-pound plates or having to sort of, you know, load these big masses. It's about relatively hard for you. I'm a huge fan of using RPE scales, rating of perceived exertion, and like a zero or 1 to 10 scale, 10 being the hardest thing you can do. And we want it generally to be in a like 7 or 8 kind of range for a lot of our training, not for all, but for a lot of our training. And so I think that's number one. I think it's about relative. And number two, I would say for all of the population, but for older individuals, myself included, I think it's competency before capacity. And so we want to groove movement patterns. We want to be competent in those movement patterns before we start loading those movement patterns, right? We want to be able to squat with good form. We want to be able to, you know, hip hinge well. We want to be able to do these fundamental movement patterns, as they're sometimes called. But we want to do them well, and we want to do them with good form before we load it. So I'd say sort of work on competency first. And then as we start to load it, it's about this concept of progressive overload. It doesn't mean going from, you know, 0 to 100 immediately. It's about a little more and a little more progress and a little more resistance or a little more volume, whatever variable you're manipulating. Typically, it's in, you know, the 5 or 1%, 1 to 5% range, maybe up to the 10 to 15% range. That's how much additional work we might be adding or intensity adding on a weekly or even maybe even a monthly basis. It's not, last week I was doing one set with, you know, of 10 goblet squats with 20 pounds. And this week I'm doing 7 sets with 50 pounds. It's about a slow progress and progress journey. So yeah, I'd focus on relative intensity, get competency first, and then slowly progress. And as long as we're slowly progressing, I think we're going to be, you know, we're heading in the right direction. And that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and it gives your body a chance to adapt properly because I think a lot of people do run into the issue of like their muscles get super strong, but the ligaments and tendons are like, whoa, 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 we're not quite there.
Yeah, I think there's physiologically you want all of the system to upgrade at the same time. And I think there's this also thing of a motivation if you're just starting out, right? You want to, yeah, I'm motivated to do this. I'm in, like, and then you hit it hard and you do your first training session and you hit like an hour in the gym or in your home gym or on your tonal, and you push it, and you get through the session. Maybe it wasn't the most enjoyable, but you did it. And the next day, pretty sore, right? Day after, really sore, delayed onset muscle soreness. And then it's like takes you like 3, 4, 5 days maybe to get over it before you get back in. I would much rather people come in, do 20 minutes, really enjoy it, start progressing. Like maybe you didn't push yourself. Maybe it was 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10, but you had a good time. The soreness was manageable. And then you're ready to come back either tomorrow or the day after and go again. And I think that's a much better way to progress. And we actually have actually a ton of data around that,
Yeah.
and increasing in duration being a really high correlator to long-term success.
Yeah, honestly, that's one of those things as a young trainer I didn't really appreciate too much. But when you get into the time and how much like it affects like tonnage and like volume overall, where you're just like, wow, this is one way to progress that people can actually handle without being like, here's 10 more pounds.
Yeah. Yeah, we got a lot of variables that we can manipulate. And I think we need to use those as trainers or as people that want to make like, what's the right variable to manipulate to help me keep progressing? It could be volume, it could be intensity, it might even be like exercise selection. You can make something sort of harder or easier. On tonal, we have something called dynamic weight mode. So we can add like variable resistance, but they're all just variables that we can manipulate to keep us progressing.
Yeah, because I think the big thing that I run into, like when I'm programming, and I know some people do, like when they're at home, when you get into these rep schemes that are like really kind of intricate, and you're trying to have some real fun with the numbers and everything, sometimes the correct percentages don't exactly line up perfectly. Which I saw one of your videos with the tonal. I'm like, there was like a 12, 10, 8, and I'm like, this would be a nightmare if I was trying to figure out for a client like bang, bang, bang. But on there, it's like percentage, boom, boom, boom. It's like you just go, right?
Yeah, I used to stay like historically, like when working with Olympic athletes, my previous 20 years of my role, I would program relatively simple for some of the reasons that you're talking about. Like people don't want to have to load and unload the bar. And like if I wanted to do like this wave scheme or an ascending scheme, it's a challenge to do even in an elite training environment. It just doesn't make time efficient training. But with tonal, I found that people love variety. It's been one of the ways that we can manipulate, not randomness, but like, yeah, people would rather if you were doing 4 sets of 10, like say your goal was to build a bit of muscle, right? And so an example would be to take 4 sets of 10 to close to failure, like 1 or 2 reps from failure, maybe 3 reps from failure. That would be I would say, a fairly typical, you'd see it in a research protocol. You should build muscle using that kind of protocol. The data from Tonal says, yeah, people will do that, but they kind of get a bit bored. If I made that like a 12, 10, 8, and a back off with a 16 rep or something, just kind of, just playing around with it, then that's much more engaging cognitively, much more enjoy it. In a gym, that would be a nightmare to do. Like, I'd be loading the bar, unloading the bar, calculating the percentages, what's the right one. On tonal, essentially every time you lift, because it's monitoring at 50 times a second, it can essentially repredict your 1RM and a percentage of your 1RM for every single time. So when it says 12, it knows that, Troy, that's 100 pounds. Okay, next one is 10, that's 110 pounds. And next one's 8, that's 120 pounds, or whatever it might be. And so it automatically adjusts those weights dynamically, which makes it much easier than having to manually and unmanually both calculate and load the bar.
It sounds like for the types of trainers that love to geek out on different like rep schemes and go really deep into the exercise science, it sounds like a dream. Like this is
Yeah.
like, oh, if only we could do this with everybody. But at home, it's even better.
Yeah, you can go down the rabbit hole as much as you want. I would say people like myself and my team, yeah, we get to program all of this from basics to complex. From a user perspective, you touch a button and do a workout. If you're a trainer and you kind of like to do that, you can play around with any of these combinations of schemes or modes or however you would like and go down. So it's fairly flexible in that you can stay surface level or you can go deep depending on your desire.
Yeah, yeah. Because honestly, when it comes to variety, I think a lot of people do fall into the trap of like going so off the charts with variety that they sacrifice results. And I know you said like when it comes to how you program, like you're able to get the engagement level really high, which speaks volumes as to your programming skills because everybody knows you can write a really damn good program. And if nobody does it, it's pretty much pointless.
Yeah, yeah. This was a relatively new phenomenon to me coming from my background. Is like Olympic athletes, while they go through their ups and downs, overall very high levels of both intrinsic motivation. They are very motivated. They're very desired to get the outcomes that they want to get. And so you could write what I now realize was probably one of the most boring training programs ever. Mostly do it to a T. I came,
Hey,
come to
us
Tonal.
meatheads would do it no problem.
Yeah, yeah. Like I'm in. Like doesn't matter. Like 2 hours in the gym doing straight sets with 5 minute recovery. Sure, if that's
Hell
what helps
yeah.
my goals, I'm sign me up. You come to Tonal and general populations and hundreds of thousands of people across the country. And yes, you're like, okay, I could write that program. I'm like, huh, that bombed. Why? Like, it's a great program. My athletes loved it. And then you start diving into the data. Oh, it's an 85-minute session. Not that many people want to work out for 85 minutes. So what are the time efficient training techniques that I could use? Can I use supersets or antagonistic paired? So opposing muscle groups, a push exercise and then a pull exercise. Can I use, other time efficient training techniques? Can I make the rep scheme more interesting and changes in there? And so it's really sort of the ability to manipulate those while keeping eyes on the prize, right? While we do have quite a lot of members that are just intrinsically motivated to exercise now, and there's value in just doing that, most people are working towards some type of goal, right? It might be health and longevity, performance there. Some people might have some aesthetics goals. I want to build some muscle. I want to lose some fat. It might be I want to play with my grandkids or my kids. And I want to do these. And so we need to keep those in focus. We want to be helping them progress towards there, but we have quite a lot of optionality in how we get there. The scientist in me and the the research or the elite sport person might say this is the best way to do it, not most optimal. But if no one does it, it doesn't matter. And so I would much rather have a quote suboptimal program that's highly engaging and still effective, but maybe not maximally effective, that help people, but it keeps people engaged and stay consistent.
Yeah, because I mean, anybody who's gone to the gym for long enough sees those people that you do these, they're doing these ridiculous programs, and you're just like, they're in shape though. And then you see these people like buying these really in-depth programs, complex, that are really out of shape because they only do it once every so often when they feel motivated.
Yeah. And the trick is, and I still work on this and tone on my team, and I think every trainer does, is what's the right balance of those two? And it varies depending on the person in front of you. The Olympic athlete, yeah, the most scientifically effective program, regardless of how mundane it may be, that's probably what I would more gravitate towards. Someone that's just new to exercise, or they've been trying exercise and falling off the wagon 20 times because they get bored, I'm going to give you more variety than I think is probably ideal from a training program perspective, but I'm going to strategically put it in there quite a lot. And I'm going to keep you going. Like, as I'm going to, consistency is your number one goal before we worry about any physiological adaptation.
Yep, absolutely. And I like how you brought up too the fact that people are like trying to really focus on muscle now because they see the value in it, where it's like I can live a higher quality life. I can run around with my kids, my grandkids. And when somebody hears building muscle, all of a sudden bulkiness comes into the picture. And you're like, we know that takes a long time. But like if somebody listening right now is like, I want to put on some good muscle and I want to live my best life, what would be some tips you'd give them right off the bat to focus on?
I think the number one, yes, building muscle. If it was easy to get bulky, I want to get toned. I don't want to get bulky. Yeah, same. Just like build muscle with with relatively low body fat, and you will be toned. To do that, I think the scientific evidence is pretty clear that the two most important variables for building muscle is the amount of volume of training. So number of sets is the easiest way to think about that. Sets per muscle group per week. So if I want to sculpt my thighs, quad dominant focused, I'm going to be wanting to generally, if I'm like an intermediate, I would say the research evidence gravitates, and a couple of meta-analysis, Bez Valle from a couple of years ago and Brad Schoenfeld from a few years before that, 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week. I would split that into at least 2, if not 3 sessions. So I want to be doing about 6 to 8 sessions per muscle group per week. And I might do that 2 or 3 times. So that's going to get me in my 10 to 20%, 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week. And those sets need to be relatively intense or hard, not in terms of the amount of weight that I lift, but how close to failure that I lift. So I need to get them to, about definitely, I'd say not definitely, but probably less than 5 reps from failure, probably closer to 2 reps from failure. So like if
Yeah.
you said you could lift this weight for 10 times, you might only lift it, 5, 6 to 8 times. So you don't have to go to failure. I think the research is pretty clear in that. And our own evidence suggests that people are building muscle quite clearly without going to failure. You can go to failure if you want to, if you desire to. If you do, I would say that for the last set of a training session. But you need to work relatively hard. So I think those are the two variables. If I was going to say, how do you maximize muscle mass from a training perspective? I said you want to be doing sort of on average about 10 to 20%, 20 to 20 sets per muscle group per week. And you want to be most of those sets to relatively close to failure. Obviously, there's a lot of other variables that go in. You need to eat sufficient protein in order to build that muscle mass. It's going to help you a lot if you sleep well and if you appropriately feed outside of just your protein. But I think those are the two training variables that I would most focus on from a muscle building perspective.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. I know that a lot of people are going to take that and be like, all right, good, go. But when it comes to how you mentioned like 2 to 5 repetitions in reserve, now I'm curious because that has to do mostly with training age, correct? Where it's like in the beginning of your training, like when you're just starting out, you'll get a lot more stimulus out of that far away from failure. But as you get older in your training age, and for anybody who's like, what's training age? Basically, the day you start is when you're a newborn, the day you start training. Like somebody 2, 3 years in will get more out of a little bit closer to failure than when they started, correct?
Yeah, I think that's a fair estimation. Honestly, the research is not super clear because so much of the research in this space is on untrained or relatively newly trained individuals. It's really difficult. I get to work with a lot of researchers, so I have a lot more empathy for them than I used to. But they're like, why isn't this people who've been training for 5 years? I'm like, people who've been training for 5+ years don't want you messing around with their training. Do 12 weeks and just do these 2 exercises and don't work that hard. And they're like, I don't want to do that. So lots of them are in these relatively untrained. But I think generally, yes, I think there is some evidence to suggest that it makes theoretical sense at least that you want a bit more stimulus the more you are in your training, and probably you need a bit more volume too. You're more likely to get adaptations like build that muscle if you've never lifted. There's actually the best research on this is untrained people. I think they were overweight or obese. I can't remember the research study, but they started building muscle mass from just walking. They got hypertrophy building muscle from just walking because they were completely untrained. Now, once those people are past the untrained perspective, no longer do you build muscle mass by just walking. You need to add additional resistance. I think the same heuristic is true. That you probably want to work a little closer to failure, maybe more in that 3-2-1 rep from things. The more resistance train you are, and your volume may need to eat up a little bit.
Yeah. And I know just from personal experience with my own clients, like some people will work out as little as 2 times a week, getting 3 to 4 sets per muscle group at each session. And they're still seeing really, really good results, getting a few pounds of muscle on every month or two. And it's like, that's plenty to live the life that you want to live.
Yeah, absolutely. It all depends on your time frame of how quickly you want to build this muscle mass, and how much muscle mass or strength do you want to build. Again, like I talked about time efficient training, I do a ton of drop sets. I don't do that many sets, but each set, like a drop set being, say I'm doing bicep curls, start with 30 pounds, get close to failure. It takes me 6-8 reps. Then I drop to 25 and do another, 6 to 8 reps, get close to failure, drop 10. I do one of those, which is, I think the research says, equivalent to about 3 to 4 sets of normal sets. So when I say 10 to 20 sets, that might be 3 to 4 drop sets in a given week. I'm not saying you want to train that way all the time. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But you definitely don't need a lot of volume to start growing when you're early in your training career, and you even need even less volume to just maintain. If you're in a good spot and I just need to maintain, you need very little to do that, which is pretty awesome to hear. for someone
Yeah.
that
And
does
that,
take some breaks and go to New York and only gets a, half a training session. And how much do I need to not lose this valuable muscle mass that I have built?
that's the real question.
Yeah.
But that brings up a good point, though, because I know when it comes to drop sets and even just like things that push past failure, like different techniques, the thing that comes into question is fatigue management. And especially in the 40 plus community, fatigue management is such a huge deal that nobody ever talks about because they're like, what? I can't just burn the candle at both ends and get everything I want. But when it comes to those styles of training, what are some of your favorite ones where you don't go crazy on the fatigue, but you get a lot of benefit out of it?
Yeah. I'm a big fan of drop sets for the right muscle group. I'm not
Yeah.
drop setting barbell squats. Like that's
Yeah.
not
Now,
the exercise.
bicep curls compared to like deadlifts and
I'll
stuff,
be on
totally
the
different,
floor for
guys.
the next, I don't know, however long. I'm not sure if I'll get up again.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna be on the floor for the thing. But for an isolation, biceps and
Yeah.
triceps, somewhat shoulder lat raises, I only drop set those. They're small
Yeah.
muscle groups. Like the fatigue is real, but it's very local muscular. It's not systemic. My joints are not taking a beating doing them. So I certainly
Now,
like.
real quick, can you explain the difference between like localized and systemic fatigue? Because this is a big topic I want everybody to really grasp here because it's a big deal.
Yeah, so like local fatigue would be my bicep after doing a curl. There's build up some metabolites, my pH has changed, my calcium ion flux. It's all these things that are happening in the muscle cell that means that the cross bridges themselves that basically generate the force, they're not working optimally. They are like they're not many of them forming, or they can't form as strong. And so I'm essentially weaker from that very local muscular perspective. If I wanted to squat, I'd have no issues doing a squat. That it wasn't tiring my entire body; it was just tiring my local muscle. And that recovery tour, so it depends on how much you do, but is relatively short term and can change. You come back to relatively high rates relatively quickly. Although if you really, even do sort of some of that, it might take you 24, 48 hours in order to do that. Systemic fatigue is where essentially my brain and my central nervous system, I have taxed that out. I'm doing a very high, like very relatively intense or high percentage of my 1RM, and a large amount of muscle mass or force or movement is being done. So imagine a barbell deadlift with close to your max weight, and you're doing, I'm doing 5 sets of 5 repetitions. That my muscles, yeah, they're pretty tired at the end of it, but my ability to contract any of my muscles or coordinate anyone is somewhat down regulated. And so this central nervous system, the synapses and the sending the signals, that system is taxed out. And that also has a fatigue cycle to it. Some of it comes back relatively short term. Some of it may take 48, 72, 96 hours before we see that systemic fatigue start to sort of knock down. So generally my sort of rule of thumb is, yeah, smaller muscle group being worked or smaller range of motion, more likely to do an intensification technique, a drop set, something that makes it harder, something that is larger, big compound movements, like heavy weight, high percentage of 1RM, much more likely to do a traditional straight set, and give myself more recovery between doing multiples of them.
Yeah. Because what
Um,
comes to mind with all this is like, somebody's going to take this research and take these techniques and be like, I want to grow my butt or I want to grow my chest. And then they're doing RDLs and like bench press, killing themselves. And they're like, I just want to grow that one part. So
yeah.
it's like, you kind of just need to know the trade off you're making.
Yeah, and like I think there's actually a reasonable amount of evidence and growing amount of research that like, we in the I say we the bodybuilding would call community would call them like specialization phases, right? You're doing a
Hmm.
specialization of chest, and you could really jack up the volume. You could do drop sets or huge amounts of volume, but essentially, if you think about like a bathtub and all the sets per muscle group per week, if you really over-index on that chest, you're going to have to under-index on some other pieces. So, hey, I really want to grow my glutes or my chest. That's great. You could do more than my 10 to 20 set sort of recommendation. Do 25, do 30, do 35. There's some evidence to say that may be beneficial. I'm not saying anyone should start there and not everyone should get there. But am I going to be doing that for like glutes, back, chest, buys, tries, shoulders, all at the same time? No, I can't. I'd be systemically so tired. I just wouldn't be able to move. So you can do like one or two of these muscle groups, The larger the muscle group, the kind of smaller the number you have to focus on, or the more you have to reduce overall volume, or overall intensity. So like something like my biceps, yeah, I can specialize them and my triceps at the same time. Not a huge deal. If it was glutes or back, yeah, that's going to be my focus, and everything else is going to be on maintenance.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know people listening are probably hearing this like, all right, cool. So how the heck do I do this? I know me personally, like when I program for clients, it's mostly full body stuff because if you miss a day, not a big deal. You're not missing an entire muscle group. So like I know I'll do 3 days of full body and then fourth day will be that specialized area. And that's a really simple way of doing it. But do you have any other ways to break it down that you like programming?
I would say, yeah, I like full body training for your average general person that just wants to get a little bit fitter, a little bit stronger, a little bit of build muscle mass, and they're like committed to 3 days a week, full body all the time for exactly the same reason. Like life comes up, things come up, and I know you've got 2 great training sessions in, even if you miss one, no problem. I think once you get to 4 or more, I would generally go to probably 2 full bodies if it was a sort of 2 full body days and then maybe 2 specialization days, but not for like, an upper body day or a lower body day, depending on what you're focusing on. Is kind of how I prefer to do it. But like there's so many options that you can play around with that. As long as you're
Now
giving,
hearing that, I'm about to throw in a second arm day. So these
yeah.
guns are about to get pumped up.
Yeah, we just released this series of programs. So we have like 300 or something programs on Tonal that you can go and do. And we released like this mini series called the Ultimates. And so it's like Ultimate Chest, and it's 4 weeks, a specialization phase. But all of them follow the same pattern. Is there's 2 specialization days that focus not exclusively but primarily on that muscle group, and then 2 full body days that essentially focus on everything else. And so that's kind of how we got that. And that seemed to be a really popular way of doing it. That gives enough sufficient volume. We're getting to like right around 20 sets per month for the chest in that kind of structure of doing it. That worked very well, but there's tons of options.
Yeah. And for somebody listening who's just like, yeah, why can't I just do the areas I want? And why do I have to do full body? Like, what would you tell somebody in that situation?
You can, just depends on your
Yeah.
goals. Like if all you want to do is buys and tries, and that's like it really does
Have
depend
at it.
on what your goals are. If your goals are, hey, I want to move really well when I'm 60 and I want to play with my grandkids, or I want to continue playing X sport for as long as I can, does that, like, your way that you're training likely help you achieve the goal that you're stating is important to me? And so I think that's where we get the mismatch, or the imbalance happens is, hey, I say I think these are important to these are my long-term goals, which most of mine are related to long-term health and fitness. Like I'm training for life right now. I still have some semi-aesthetic goals in that I want to look like I lift. But I don't, most of my goals are related to there. So yeah, I probably need to be working on single leg balance exercises. Do I like Bulgarian split squats? Hell no. But are they probably the single best thing that I can do given my long? Yeah. So I like, okay, well, how do I bake them in the best possible way to get the sort of stimulus that I need, while also padding it with some stuff that I really like, which is arm day.
Yep. And that's the key, really, is like, how do I do the stuff I need to do? I know I should do, and the stuff that actually gets my ass to the gym.
Yes. Yeah. And a balance of those. I tend to actually like, it's not an antagonistic superset, but I tend to superset something I love and something I hate. And I got Bulgarian
Yep.
split squats with curls because I really want to do the curls and I know what's programmed with them. So I'm gonna flip flop those two. Like
It's
they're
like a little
separated.
reward, little dessert.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, a bit of sugar with the medicine. Like whatever works for you to get it in. Like I know a lot of people that like try and save it for the end. I take it much like
Never
my
ends up happening.
vegetables. Yeah, I do it much like my vegetables. I'm going in, I'm getting it out, and then I'm enjoying the rest of my training session. I'm gonna do the stuff that I know I need to do. I've had quite a few surgeries. My back gets kind of tight. I have a lot of prehab work that just it clears everything up great. But if I don't get that done first thing in the morning, yeah, I won't get it done. So that's when it needs to come.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, especially with the surgeries and like injury prevention becomes a thing too, where it's like as people get into that 60, 70, 80 range, like fall prevention becomes like a big, big deal. So I know one of the things, I was going down your feed and I noticed that you did a really good post on power training. And this is one of those things that people don't really put into their programs. You don't see a lot of people throwing medicine balls or jumping in the gym, in commercial gyms. It's all just machines, machines. Like, how do you like to program it into your training or even into the tonal training?
Yeah, I would say number one, I there's a plethora of evidence really strong that muscle mass is important for like both lifespan and health span, like the number of years that you live and how high quality those are. Strength is even more important. Even if you don't have a lot of muscle mass, as long as it's relatively strong, like that's going to help you protect you. I think there is a growing body of evidence. And I think if we have this conversation in 5 years, you'll actually find that power is probably the single most important thing for health span and the quality of your life, because power is like force times velocity, your ability to have some strength, but to apply that with speed. And that is the activities of daily living. That is walking up the stairs, getting out of a chair, walking across the street, the Green Man. It is for those that want to be more active. I can do all of those things, even in your 60s and 70s, not a problem. That's your 200-yard or 300-yard golf swing. That's your like picking your grandkid up and swinging them around. Those are power activities. They're time bound, so they need to be fast. And so I that's my hypothesis. I think there's a growing body of evidence. I don't think it's that large yet, but I think you're going to find, or my hunch is, there's going to be more and more value to that power training. So how do you program it? Well, I think competency before capacity. I go back to that. You need good movement patterns before you can apply A, force, or B, speed, or C, both of those. So you want to make sure they're well done. So I tend to do that with body weight exercises first. It might be something like a body weight squat to like a calf raise. So you don't want to do jump squats. Maybe 60. That's a little much. I'm not really ready for that right now. Maybe I want to progress there, but just go down, come up concentrically as fast as you can, and go up onto your toes, and just go
I
down
am
and up onto your toes.
totally stealing that.
Control the eccentric. Like, it doesn't need to be super fast on the eccentric, so you can control the way down. But it's the power is about the intent to move fast. Yes, we measure that by how fast you move, but from a like central nervous system perspective and from body, it's the intent to move with speed. And so moving fast in a body weight exercise, progress that same type of exercise. Maybe it's a split squat into a calf raise or something like that. So it's one-legged. So you need to put a little bit of balance and stability, and you can go in there. On tonal, once you're ready to progress and add more resistance, we have a mode called chains. So you've maybe seen in the gym when people load up physical chains. Essentially, that's a variable resistance technique. So when more of those chain links are on the floor, the implement that you're lifting, the barbell, is lighter. As you get higher, more of those links come off of the floor and it gets heavier. That's actually a really good way of developing power. Now, in your home gym, you might not want to be going out and buying a bunch of chains. On tonal, that's a touch of the button. You touch it, I can add resistance. So when I'm in the bottom of that squat, it's only 50 pounds. But when I'm at the top, it's at 75 pounds. And that allows me to generate speed during that movement with increasing resistance, which really maximizes the power development. So that's one way that we work on it there. I also do that with exercises like rotational chopping. I'm a big fan of rotational
Oh
power.
yeah.
That's like functionally, that's like getting the carry-on suitcase like from the floor up and over. Like there's an up, there's a twist and a push. Like
Yep.
that's
Any
like
any golfers, any tennis
yeah,
players here, this is your jam.
yeah. Rotational power. I do like to golf badly. But I can hit the ball reasonably far when I connect to it. It's just not consistent.
Let's be
But
honest,
yeah,
most of us are out there for the step goal. We're
yeah,
just swinging and hoping.
yeah. But adding chains to those types of movement patterns, essentially, you imagine your body like when you're going with a non-variable resistance weight, right? When you get towards that end of range of motion, you've got to slow down because you know you're going to be stopping, right? Your body, or central governor of your brain, will tell you to slow down because it knows that I can't go any further. By adding resistance as we do that, we get to trick the brain a little bit and get to apply power for that entire range of motion. But it's really good, whether it's more of a lift action, the suitcase of a carry-on, or more of a golf swing from the top to the bottom. But working on that translation of power from floor to sort of implement, I think is a really good way to work on power and really functionally useful. And I would just say like the data is growing on its relevant role. I quote quite often, there's a study out of Peru on sort of gait speed, and it's the sit and go test.
Mhm.
And so it's a really easy test to do at home. You sit on a chair, you get a stopwatch, hit start, stand up, walk 10 feet, 3 meters, go there, turn around, come back and sit down. If you can do that less than 12 seconds, you're in pretty good shape from a point of all-cause mortality. Starts taking 15 seconds or more, that correlation to all-cause mortality goes way, way up. Your risk of dying, unfortunately, increases. And it's not because you need to do that to stay alive, but that's really indicative of the types of activities that you'll need to do and your underlying physiology. And so really easy test to do at home. You're like, where do I stand? I'm still comfortably under 10 seconds right now, so I'm good, but really easy test to go and really strongly correlate. And it doesn't feel like power until it does feel like power. And we want to wait as long as possible before that feels like a power exercise.
Yeah, because that test sounds incredible compared to like I know a lot of people are familiar with the grip test. It's like, oh, I just squeeze this thing and that means I'm healthy. But like something like that, you're getting core strength, you're getting relative strength to your body weight, your actual
Coordination,
cardiorespiratory.
balance.
Like, are you actually able to do this fast? Like, there's so many good things going on there.
Yeah. One of the, I agree, like grip strength is great. And it's great because it's really easy to do. And there's tons
Yeah.
of data around it. Like it's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. One of the data points that I found interesting from our data, so we have hundreds of thousands of users and we estimate 1 RMs and all this. Nothing about gripping shows me about your body mass. And unfortunately, it's our ability to move our mass that is really important, right? If I'm super strong, but I'm, BMI 35, weigh 300 plus pounds, whatever it might be, I might not be relatively strong to my body mass. And so we know on average, people lose about 10% of strength a year if they do nothing from like the age of 30 or 40 onwards. And then probably around 70, it starts to decline quicker. Interesting aside note is it's probably less consistent and more stepwise than we think. It's about, oh, I got injured, I lost strength. And then I plateau for a while and then got injured again and plateau. It's more individually stepwise, but when we look at a cross-sectional area, it kind of shows that sort of slow decline over time and then a rapid one. But it doesn't tell us about our strength per muscle mass. That's just our total strength. We cut all of our data by people's individual weight, and we actually see the decline is steeper and happens earlier. People peak their strength per kilo or per pound of body mass in their 20s, particularly for something like a deadlift. They get stronger in their 30s, but they also get heavier in their 30s. And they probably maintain that strength in their 40s, but they get even heavier. So you're getting relatively weaker. So it makes those differences bigger. Not only are you getting weaker, but you're getting heavier while you're getting weaker. So your ability to move that mass becomes exponentially sort of more difficult, which is the worst combination. Thankfully, our data also shows you can make massive increases in it if you train. But if you just look at the population level, it does decrease at a larger rate and an earlier rate than probably the research data currently suggests.
Yeah, and honestly, that's the mental game I had to play with myself. I'm like, listen, if we can keep the strength where it's at and decrease body weight, that's the name of the game. Pound for pound is where to go, like where to go with it, because you technically are stronger.
Yeah. Yeah, you can move that mass around better. Like, in my 40, I'm 45. Yeah, am I trying to PR strength? Not really. I'm not actually I'm trying to lose a little bit of a little bit of fat mass. I basically am maintenance. If I can maintain this strength for as long as possible, again, average population declines. If I can maintain that, and I don't want to maintain it like, Peter Attia talks about the centenarian, decathlon, all the activities. I really like it. It's a great way of framing training for life that you want to do in the last decade of life. I think what the important piece is, you need reserve capacity. Like I've unfortunately had an Achilles, 3 ACLs, a couple of back surgery. Like every time I have one of them, I drop down quite substantially, quite quickly. And so like, what's my reserve capacity? It's like an emergency fund in your bank account. No one wants to keep, 3 months of wages in their bank account, just sitting there, not making interest or just having it full stop is a challenge for many people. But when you have that big medical bill or the unexpected, right, you need the reserve capacity so you don't go into debt. And it's much like that, I think, with strength and fitness. You need a reserve capacity. So if I just slowly decline, I'm going to be great. But if I have one of these big episodes, I break a leg, I have a fall, something bad happens, I can't train for 3, 6, 8 months because something comes up, I have enough that it's okay that I can maintain and I don't drop way, way, way below. I have this extra reserve capacity. And that's kind of what I'm trying to maintain. I'm trying to maintain my reserve capacity of strength and of power and of muscle mass.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I think a lot of people don't realize that when you do get to that point where you're sick or like something as horrible as like cancer, one of the big concerns is keeping weight on. So if you have all this muscle just sitting there, you're like, all right, I can go a little bit longer and fight the fight a little bit longer.
Yeah. And like those instances of being bedridden, the research on how unfortunately quickly you lose muscle mass and bone mineral density, particularly females, unfortunately postmenopausal, it's rapid. And
Yeah.
so we want a lot of extra capacity. Should we be bedridden for a while with a, some sort of hospitalization or can't get out? We want to have that, reserve capacity so we don't fall below the line. And there's a strong research evidence base that says it's much easier to build muscle that you've already built once before, to rebuild that muscle than it is to build it for the first time. So if you've been there and you've had it, you're going to get back. Even if you drop below, whatever threshold it is, you're going to get back much quicker in like somewhere probably in a third of the time that it might take you to build that for the first time. And so it's going to help your rehab from that much, much more quickly.
Yeah, that was one of those things when I was growing up, like coming up in high school and college. I'm like, muscle memory. I'm not sure if it's legit or anything, but I hope it is. And now that we have the research to confirm it, it's like, yes, I'm so happy.
Yeah. I still actually don't know the underlying. Maybe we do, and I just don't know the underlying physiology of why it rebuilds so quickly.
Mhm.
But it's very clear that it does, and that's, to be honest, as an applied practitioner, all I mostly care about. I'm a geek too, so I like to understand the why. But yeah, you can definitely rebuild muscle quicker than it takes to build it for the first time without a doubt.
Yep, yep. So earlier the better. Now, I want to be respectful of your time. I want to get you out of here before you have to go. But last thing, because you brought up Peter Attia, and we've been talking about all these good things that people have to focus on. One of the things that I wanted to end on was VO2 max. And I know that that's another one of those indicators where people are like, listen, if you can get this to a certain place, your health is going to be in such a better spot. So when it comes to VO2 max, like what is it and how can people practically improve it?
Yeah, sure. I would say equal equal gold medals for predictors of longevity and of health span. To be honest, duration of life, it would be VO2 max and strength. Right now, maybe strength will get replaced by power eventually, but if I was going to say these are the two things that are modifiable factors, why are they so good? It's because they take a really long time to build. So you put a lot of compound invested interest into them. VO2 max is about your maximal aerobic capacity. So it's the maximum amount of oxygen that your body can extract in any given minute. It's normally measured in liters per minute or milliliters per kilogram per minute. And so that means you're breathing it in, you're breathing in oxygen from the air, it's going into your lungs, your heart is pumping it in your blood can carry that oxygen and hemoglobin, then it can get to your muscles, and then it transfuses crosses over into your muscles, and myoglobin picks it up, your mitochondria can use it, and then it gets spit back out, it gets converted into energy, and then you spit back out carbon dioxide and water. It's your maximum aerobic capacity. And so it's essentially the way to think about it is like an effort that you could sustain for about maximum effort for 3 to about 8 minutes, as hard as possible. If that was like, run around a track or cycle on a bike or whatever it might be. But think about that kind of time course. It's so powerful because it's all of the things that I talked about, so integrated of a system, right? You need cardiovascular fitness, you need your red blood cells, you need your mitochondria and your muscles working. You need all of these functioning in harmony. And I think that's why. And it can move 20, 25%, in not that short a time, but not in a very long duration. To go from like low to medium, but to go from medium to high is essentially, a lifelong pursuit of doing that. And so you need to accumulate a lot of time. So you ways to develop it. Peter Attia would take a very much what an elite athlete approach would be, which is like 80% at zone two. I put words in his mouth, but I've listened to his math podcast that I feel confident to do so. He would say like 80% out zone two, which is like easy pace, easy medium pace. It's like walking so you can talk, but you're not completely fluid in your sentences. You can still
Yeah,
talk.
it's like that zone 2 to 3 borderline.
Yeah. Something that is
Yeah.
right on that cusp of essentially 2 millimole lactate. So he was at 80% down there and then 20% doing these short, hard, sharp, intense intervals. I think if you can, if you are personally, if you're training 6, 8, 10 plus hours a week, I'd probably say that's probably optimal in my things. If you're only training for like 1, 2, 3 hours a week, I'm kind of more in the more hit camp for that type of VO2 max of make your efforts kind of intense. If you're training for less than an hour a week, I don't want to be spending too much of that at zone two. You should still walk and go out and get your exercise. But when you're training, I would take more of a Marty Gabalda, researcher out of McMaster, 1 minute workout, I think is his book. But that's very much like, hey, 60 seconds on, 60 seconds off. Repeat that 5 times. Take maybe 10 times and build up. And I would be like the shorter amount of time that I have available to train, kind of more intense I want that training to be. Doesn't mean the first time you go out and you work your like hard, like still build into it, progressive overload, all the things you talk about. But in general, less time, more intense, more time, you can make more of that easy, is how I would think about it.
Yeah, that's a good place to end it, where it's like, okay, so if you got time, make sure that we're doing this at a good moderate pace. But if you're tight on time, make it count.
Yeah. Makes sense, right? It's not,
Yeah.
you don't need to be a PhD physiologist to kind of think that might be the way that it should balance out.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, before you get out of here, if somebody's listening and they're like, damn, Troy knows his shit. I want to keep following him. I want to see more about it. And they want to see like every possible exercise the Tonal can possibly do. Where would they find you?
Yeah, that would be my Instagram is at Strength Science Troy, which is mostly, yeah, all the creative ways that you can use Tonal that I didn't get into our movement library. All the accessories I like to play with. And so, yeah, it's my primary form of training. So I share a lot of stuff on there. I do share some evidence-based fitness and some of the sort of research behind it too. That's my personal one. I'm on LinkedIn for more of my professional kind of stuff. And if you want to find out more about Tonal, that's like tonal.com. There's also on Instagram. You can see it around there.
And for anybody that's like, okay, writing all this down, don't worry. It's going to be all in the show notes. It's going to be in the description. Just click away, get your Tonal, get whatever you need, and you'll be good to go. And I'm not going to lie, you might catch yourself on that Instagram just scrolling for hours and being like, oh, that's a cool exercise. That's a cool exercise, because I definitely have. But again, Troy, thank you so much for coming on. This is one of the more like dense episodes as far as how much we were able to squeeze in, like practical information people can actually use to feel to feel incredible and live really long. So thank you for taking the time to come on.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Same here. Same here. All right, guys. Thank you for making it all the way through. Until next time, I will see you all later. But until then, go kick some ass. Bye-bye.